A very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone, from whatever place it is that you are tuned onto this webinar. If you can hear me, let me see a sign somewhere that you can hear me. Thank you, Alexander Musombi, I can see. And Sylvia Mudua, thank you, Delia. Thank you, Charles Mutiaba. And Nyandiro Dokas, John. All right, it looks like we are loud and clear all over the place. So we are going to get started with today's webinar. We will give you a bit of time, maybe 1 minute from now, before we can get deep into this and understand what it is that we've prepared for you in the webinar today. It's going to be engaging. It's very relevant in the time that we are living in. And we've prepared quite a bit of information from our Regional Director of IT Advisory at Grant Thornton, but I'll come back and share with you a bit of information just before we can get started in the next 1 minute. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much as you are joining into the webinar today. My name is Lawrence Namale, and I'm just here to coordinate that to make sure that things are running smoothly. Our webinar today, this season, we're going to be talking about data privacy. Actually, we're tagging this to the future of our organizations and also our own future. Data privacy matters more than ever in the centuries that we're living today, in the days that we're living today, especially in 2025. As late as 2025, data privacy has evolved from just a technical legal concern. It is no longer just an IT thing. It is a business strategic imperative, and it's also a major priority. Over 75% of global population now are concerned, or they are covered by data privacy regulations. Businesses must actually make sure that they treat data stewardship as a core part of their customer trust and brand reputation. If you're doing your SWOT as a business, one of the things that data can cover is actually can become your strength. Data can, if you're not careful, it can become your weakness. If you're careful enough, it can become opportunity, and it can also become a threat. So it cuts across. Businesses must be compliant and must be competitive as far as this is concerned. So I think it is important for us as businesses to build a privacy fast culture. We need to develop scalable privacy frameworks. We need to ensure there is transparency. We need to empower our customers. They need to trust that the data we hold is not going to be shared elsewhere and so on. Let me just tell you this, that I am not a data privacy guru as far as all these things are concerned, but I am aware of all these things, why they are important, and I am here to just make sure that we share as much information as possible. Our guest today is our IT Advisory Regional Director, and he is in the house. He's going to take us through as far as all these things are concerned. As of now, let me just give you a brief of Grant Thornton, even as we continue discussing these things. Grant Thornton is not just available in Uganda. It is a global organization. Actually, we call it Grant Thornton International, made up of different member firms for nearly all the continents in the world. And you can see our numbers as of last year as shown on the screen. If you look at the revenue that was generated by Grant Thornton as a body, Grant Thornton International, revenue in US dollars last year was $8 billion. We have over 76,000 people working for Grant Thornton as an organization. And then Grant Thornton is also available in over 150 markets. As you can see, our client satisfaction rate was 8.72 when we did our customer surveys from 33 member firms. Over 12,000 responses were given. And if we go forward, you see that this is just a global number, but in Africa, these are the numbers that you're looking at. We have presence in Africa alone over 24 countries, and over 3,000 people working for Grant Thornton in Africa. Also in East Africa, we are available in 8 markets, even as you can see in this graph, in this map here. The grayed out areas are where we are available virtually. That is Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are the things that, this is our presence in the region. The services that we offer are cutting across all the industries, whichever industry you come from. If your industry is in consumer products, if your industry is energy and natural resources or financial services, if you're in healthcare, if you are in industrial products, if you are a not-for-profit, if you are public sector, real estate and construction, and other services, even technology, media and telecommunications, travel, tourism and industry, whatever your sector in the world or whatever your sector in business, we have experience serving our clients in all of these of different aspects, in different service offerings, in advisory, in taxation, in business risk, also in business process solutions, and even in human services, human resource services. We have clients that we are serving in all this, and some of you are already here and you know us, and I might not even need to tell you all these things. But allow me to just share with you that Grant Thornton has a focus on 3 main areas. This is Grant Thornton Global, Grant Thornton International. We focus on people, our own people. If we don't have people who are motivated to work, then it's not going to be easy for us to fulfill the mandate that we have and the strategic focus that we have over the years. And the second thing that we focus on, of course, is our clients, making sure that our clients are served in a dynamic and in an agile way. But the third thing that we do, even as businesses focus on profits, but the other bottom line that we look at throughout the year is corporate social responsibility. I'm telling you, there is so much we can be able to share as far as this is concerned. Very many things that we do around the clock, around the year, but I don't have time to go into that. We need to go and do about data privacy. So in a nutshell, there is a practical skills development academy that was launched in Grant Thornton in 2023, Grant Thornton Uganda, where we skill these young people who have just come out of university, and we're trying to we're actually bridging the gap between school and relevance to give them some practical skills so that they can be relevant in society. And from 2023 to date, we've had 5 cohorts that have come in. A great number of them, 90% and above, have been employed, and they've been helped in different ways. It continues. It's going to continue even as we continue speaking. This weekend they are going to gather and also be imparted skills with. There is a capital investment that we're doing at Namulonge Church of Uganda Senior Secondary School in Wakiso District. By the time that Grant Thornton got about Namulonge SS, they were having about 800 students, and they didn't have classrooms. Some of them were staying outside, having classes out under a tree, but due to intervention, you can see classroom openings and so on. The number of students has increased to over 1,000. We have sponsored corporate corporate governance awards every year since 2018, especially apart from the time that there was COVID. There is always an annual blood donation. Last month we had over 1,200 pins of blood collected through our drive in Kampala and in Jinja. There is support we give to the Cancer Institute by providing them with water and also with a tent where the relatives of the patients can be able to stay. And also we offer tree planting initiatives every working day. Okay, every year every September we have tree planting exercises. There's quite a bit that I can be able to share with you as far as that is concerned, but allow me for now to welcome our speaker, Mr. Satyajit Turumella, who is our regional person as far as advisory is concerned, dealing with IT advisory and dealing with also cyber security. I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Satyajit.
Morning, Lawrence. I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. Just going to ask you, should I continue projecting, or I can give you shares to project? Is this okay?
Yeah, I think you can continue projecting. Just give me the access to run through the slides.
All right. It's okay. Yeah, let's just go continue. Here we go. Take it over.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, once again. We would like to take you through a couple of interesting things that are more relevant to you right now as you look at compliance as a journey, as you look at data privacy, as part of your daily routine in your workplace, and also understanding what kind of risks you're looking at. So from a very high level, from a perspective of what is happening currently that is relevant to us in today's world, one of the key things that we've seen is cybersecurity or cyber threats are only coming onto the board's table when there is a huge impact. It's no longer, what is happening. It is more of what is actually giving an organization, sleepless nights, what is giving the CEO sleepless night. And what we have seen is, from when we were looking at ISACA's global review of what's happening across the globe, what kind of challenges that organizations are facing. We've seen that it boils down to two critical things. One is budgets, the second one is staffing. So, for the longest time, there has been the buzz that, okay, fine, data privacy is one of those things that is coming up. There's something that is relevant that's happening, but there's been no real tangible, actionable item that has come into perspective. No one is being fined. There's nothing that is happening in our jurisdiction. But the truth is, when you look at the global numbers, you're looking at organizations, more than half of the organizations in the world are struggling to retain skilled professionals. What that means is that you're looking at a large number of organizations globally that do not have the right kind of people, the right kind of skill sets to actually contribute, to actually help in any way, form, or shape. Second, when you're looking at retaining these kind of professionals, it's becoming more and more difficult because everyone is looking at eyeing the same piece of cake, and everyone wants a share of that particular piece of cake. So what it looks like is, on the flip side, is there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of growth that is needed in terms of skilled professionals, and this is a global known issue that we have been seeing. And this is a poll that has been taken by ISACA. So a lot of organizations that have been part of this poll are actually multinational organizations. So hearing what they are saying is actually something that is very interesting to us. When you're looking at retaining this talent, as much as, yes, you want to retain the talent, the cost of actually retaining that particular person or that particular hire is going up by the day. And a lot of organizations do not understand why. Why is it that, things are changing so dynamically? Challenge is that as AI comes in, as there's a lot of buzz around AI coming in, taking over people's jobs. There are hardly a handful of people who understand what AI can actually do. Given that AI is still in its infancy stage, there are a lot of things that professionals are supposed to be cognizant about, because you're looking at AI hallucinations, you're looking at AI not giving you the right kind of advice, you're looking at a lot of unverified information, unverified advice that's coming from AI, just when you're looking at generative AI. Yeah, because currently what we have seen is there's a lot of inclination towards generative AI like ChatGPT, like Copilot. But the truth is, using this in terms of how it can assist your organization's strategy, driving it forward. There are very few organizations in the world that actually understand using AI can actually enable their organization in cybersecurity, which is another key area that we have seen. Finance has always been the largest problem because you're looking at least more than half of the organizations are underfunded when it comes to cybersecurity strategy, when it comes to cybersecurity spending, data privacy spending. What it means is that so many organizations across the globe, in fact, more than half of the organizations across the globe are not yet ready to actually, say that they are 100% sure of what is their situation in terms of cybersecurity posture. They're not able to guarantee you, they're not able to tell you that, yes, this is what our critical infrastructure looks like, this is what we are capable of, this is what we're able to do, and this is how we're able to protect our infrastructure. A lot of organizations across the globe have suffered a lot of privacy breaches, have suffered a lot of data losses in the past. And that speaks volumes based on the kind of financial investment that needs to go into these organizations. And these are not organizations that we're talking about that are out there. These are organizations within our ecosystem, within Africa, and pretty much global as well. Now, when you look at the people perspective, which is the more predominant perspective, we see that at least almost about 60% of the organization is understaffed when it comes to looking at cyber threats, specifically around incident response and handling, around cyber risk mitigation, cyber threat profiling, cyber threat hunting, anything to do with specific risks. We're still traditionally focused on what particular risks are we looking at in terms of business processes. But one of the key risks that people are not addressing are processes relating to HR hiring, which is basically, again, hiring these specific resources who are highly skilled. Ideally, you're looking at about a 3 to 6 month window to hire one talent, which is basically not your usual fit, because we have seen people who come out of universities, we've seen people with degrees, we've seen people with certifications, but the actual truth is the skilled people are still not available in the industry. There's still a lot of skill gap in the industry. And what does this mean to organizations? It means that there is still threat that is underlying there in terms of the processes that are needed to fasten this entire process. And the complex landscape that we're currently dealing with is actually a stress factor to those who are already within the organization and they're not able to understand how best they can actually balance their lives. The work-life balance becomes very difficult because you're looking at least half of these resources that you have within your organization suffering due to burnouts. And all this, why is it relevant to us today? It is relevant because it's not when a cyber attack will, it's not if a cyber attack it will happen, it is when a cyber attack will happen. And when a cyber attack does happen, what is the first thing that takes a hit? It's the information. What is the hack value, if you must use that term? What is the one key crown jewel for any organization? What is that one thing that your competitor is looking for? Data. And when you're looking at data, the most simplest thing is your customers. So if I'm able to gain access into your customers' database and I'm able to see the number of customers that you have, information about your customers, I will be able to then see how best I can use my resources to bring those customers onto my side if I'm a competitor. So those are all challenges that then come about. So what kind of risks are we looking at in terms of driving towards an ecosystem that is digitally trusted, and why is digitally trusted an important factor in the organization that you're running? See, in the past, the cost of compliance was not as high as what it is right now. When I say compliance cost, we're looking at data privacy coming on top of your regular normal compliances. For instance, you have submissions to your revenue authorities, etc. Now, cost of actually complying has gone up because you have now additional requirements that are coming in terms of registration with your local authorities, making sure that your internal processes are compliant, doing a lot of vendor due diligence to see if your vendors are actually compatible to work with your current ecosystem, if they are actually compliant with your organization as a whole in terms of policies and procedures, as well as compliant with the local laws and regulations. Second, fines. We've seen that there's quite a bit of an inclination towards large fines being imposed on organizations that are non-compliant. So these are contingent liabilities that are coming in that in the past did not exist. And that leads to also litigation. We've seen instances where staff internal to the organization have sued the organization for unfair dismissal, for unauthorized disclosure of information, etc. So again, the cost of litigation, the cost of actually managing such kind of issues has gone up. And why is that all coming in right now? Because of the use of generative AI? Is that one of the things? Can be a possibility, because a lot of organizations within their ecosystem do not really necessarily understand what a ChatGPT prompt can do, because most of them are still using ChatGPT like what they would use Google. They're still asking questions, but what they don't understand is there's a profile that is being created about the individual who's actually working or using this particular generative AI. There's a lot of information that is being transferred. There's a lot of personal information that is being queried. There's a lot of information that is being exchanged between platforms. Second is, when you're looking at transparency, when you want to understand what kind of people or what kind of organizations have access to your data, the thought itself is kind of confusing because you do not know. And the confusion comes around as to, is it you who owns the data? Is it the organization that owns the data? And that creates a lot of challenges when trying to address what belongs to you as an individual versus what belongs to the organization. And that is where now the principles of data privacy come in to protect the data subject, which is now enhanced transparency. Now, yes, the data subject, who's a living human being, has the right to ask or to create a requirement to say that I need to know what exactly is an organization processing about me? What kind of data is it collecting? What kind of data is being processed about me? Where is this information being stored? Who else also has authorization and access to this particular information that you are collecting about me? So whereas the individual has that right to know, the organization on the other side does not understand how to answer that question correctly. Because one, there's no clear data inventory that is there, that has been mapped for any organization. So which means in order for you to actually understand where this information sits, becomes a bit challenging. Information can sit on WhatsApp, can sit on a piece of paper that is on an individual's desk. It can be in the form of a photograph. It can be in the form of a message. We don't really know what are the formats that can actually go out, or we can only understand so much about where this data is resting. People who have left the organization leave with certain information. People who are in the organization who have lost information also do not have that access to that information anymore. So there are a lot of questions that come about in the data lifecycle. So organizations in the past have been required not to enhance transparency, but now with the new privacy regulations that have come in, privacy requirements and transparency has now become a very big requirement in terms of what kind of information is being processed, how is this information being processed, and to what extent is this information being processed. Now, when we're talking about processing such kind of information, sorry, you'll need to go back to the previous slide, Florence. We're still not done. Thank you. So when you're talking about this kind of information, we're talking about an ecosystem. We're not just talking about the organization at the face of it. You have internal and connected stakeholders as well as you have external stakeholders. A lot of organizations nowadays, because of the cost element, are looking at the cloud, where instead of going toward the capital expenditure, you're looking at more of a revenue-based model where you're paying, you're subscribing, so that becomes an OpEx for you. Now, when you're looking at those kind of requirements, what exactly is happening is that you're creating an environment where a third party is managing a lot of the information that the organization is driving or the organization is collecting. Now, you have back in the day when everything was still on-prem, everything was still held within the organization. There were servers, there were specific applications that were deployed on the servers. The infrastructure was pretty much secured, safeguarded within one particular room. But now with the emerging technologies that are there, the security enhancement may be a challenge in certain areas. For instance, you have applications that are no longer sitting on your application server. They are now on a subscription model. You have you have apps that are licensed. These are applications that you're probably using that do not necessarily belong to you, but you have to pay a license fee on a monthly basis. Like for instance, in Microsoft Office, you have some legacy applications that are sitting within your organization that are no longer being used, but they still store a lot of information. You have infrastructure, which is basically now your underlying platforms. But what is happening now is you're moving towards the cloud. So you're looking at infrastructure as a service, you're looking at platform as a service, you're looking at containers within a cloud environment where people are able to deploy their applications at very low cost. And you're looking at infrastructure that is more scalable than it was a few years ago. Now, what does this mean to us? It means that the rate at which data is moving between your premise and the outside is more. So which means that the enhanced protection layers that were not there are now coming into effect. Which means that one of the biggest factors for any customer now to place reliance on the product, on the kind of services that you're providing to them, becomes very key. So the trust is now not only on the brand itself or on your particular business, but now it's focused on the kind of information that is being collected and the kind of models that you're running. You don't necessarily have to disclose this to the customer, but the truth is, should there be any sort of a breach, should there be any breach at a vendor premise, it's not even at your premise, can be at a vendor premise, and you've not been able to inform the customer, and that data about that individual has leaked into the webs or into the dark web or into any other place, then there's reputation damage. So there's definite erosion of customer trust, which is the biggest underlying factor. There's no way you can put a cost to it. So there are a lot of these elements that then come about when you're looking at the nitty-gritty details that lead to building a trusted ecosystem within your organization. Now, when you're looking at building an ecosystem, a lot of people have this thought that, yes, everything is on the cloud, so we are still fine. We have a particular number of vendors who each of them are responsible for one particular thing in the organization, which is a governance decision, which is fair enough because, of course, hiring would be much more expensive than outsourcing. So what is the best way to look at it? A lot of people tend to go back to basics. They just want to say, okay, number one, we have everything deployed on the cloud. Number two, we have access to that particular cloud environment. Number three, we're going to have certain people who will access this environment in a specific manner, and business as usual. We have applications that are running. We have everything moving in the right direction. At least that's what the perception is. The truth is, the complexities start going up the moment you have third parties coming in, because now you're not just looking at your infrastructure, you're also depending on the security measures and the security posture of your third party, which is where now things become more and more interesting and more complex. So one of the key components that we look at is, what kind of threats are the third party vendors looking at? That is one kind of risk that no one usually looks at. Second is, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of connectivity do we have? Is it just going to be your normal internet ISP provider, internet service provider coming in to connect onto a firewall, and are we just going to leave it there and we have access through a firewall? Is that what is necessary? No. Because now with increasing complexities, you have an increased number of endpoints. Now you're able to access whatever is on the cloud on your mobile phone as well. So which means that there has to be some level of hardening, some level of security that needs to come into the ecosystem at a perimeter level. Third is, yes, you have your devices, you have the applications, but then you have the third largest component and the weakest part of the link, and that is your human component. And that is where you have your users. So identity and access management becomes a very critical component when you're looking at what kind of services are being provided by a third party, what kind of services are being consumed by a user, and how is this entire ecosystem coming in from a risk perspective. Because now you're not just using an email address and a password, you're using tokens, you're using two-factor authentication. You're using device identities to actually now gain access into the perimeter. You're now using your network as an identity to actually allow access into the cloud perimeter, etc. So when you have those kind of complexities coming in, there's a lot of structured and unstructured data that's being generated. Now, the interesting thing is, yes, there's as much as the data is increasing, as much as data is being formed, and there's a lot of data that's growing, labeling it, encrypting it, making sure that there's some sort of a structured way to identify and see and monitor rather, what kind of data is coming in, going out, is very essential, because now you're using not just the internet, but you're also using various other dependencies that then come into perspective. And that is where the compliance part plugs in. So it is not just in one segment. It's not just at the vendor contract level. It's not just at the application level. It's not just at the human resource or from a governance policy level, but it is now coming in to look at the entire ecosystem. And that is where you need to see, as an organization, what kind of continuous visibility is there in terms of transparency. How is it that you're managing your third parties? How is it that you're able to monitor what level of compliance is there from a third party, as well as, looking at it from your perspective? What are the kind of common matrices that you can look at in terms of enhancing privacy and in enhancing transparency in how the entire data is being processed? The next slide, please. Now, from a digital trustworthy ecosystem, what are the key components that we're looking at? We're looking at, first of all, the quality of the output. We're looking at what kind of quality deliverables are there. And the second most important thing, again, comes back to security and privacy. When we're putting quality, security, and privacy together, the third and the most important component is the usability. When your security is too hard, or when you're too secure, your user experience is not the best. When your user experience is the best, your security is not really the best. So understanding on the sensitive areas of balance around how to maintain the quality of the information that is being collected, securing it in a reliable manner, then plays a very important role. So which means it's not just these two components. You're actually looking at the reliability of your service provider, you're looking at reliability of your staff, you're looking at reliability of the entire ecosystem that you're working with. And now comes the ethics and integrity part. Yes, as long as there are some policies, as long as there are some overarching governance structures, some reporting lines, some transparency that's coming in, a lot of organizations would think that they are able to maintain a very ethical way of approaching data. But the truth is, yes, as much as there are ethics and integrity that are coming into picture, as long as there is transparency in the data, there's still a human value to it. So which means that there has to be some sort of ethical consideration when you're looking at data being used for your business purposes. So it cannot just be that, yes, data is the value that you're looking at. But the truth is that as much as you're looking at data from a value perspective, there's also the perspective of data coming in from the ownership perspective, because here what you're looking at is you're looking at the quality of data that's there, you're looking at the availability of the data that's there, you're looking at what kind of stability and resilience are you going to build. And the most important question is, who is the owner of this particular data? Are we talking about the enterprise being the owner of the data? Are we talking about the individual being the owner of the data? What exactly is it that we're looking at that we're supposed to be more clear in terms of the ownership perspective? So the ownership can be single, can be multi-layered, can be one particular data set can be owned by more than one people, in simple terms. So an example is, you've got an online transaction, you go to a store, you're paying by maybe you're paying using your credit card or your debit card. Let's understand how much of or who actually has access to this. So you've got your store, you've got yourself, number one. You've got a storekeeper who's used your credit card. You've got the bank, you've got the payment service gateway, and you've got your application from the store that is collecting this information. So question is it just going to be you, or is it going to be all these five people? And that is where the ownership comes in, and that is where driving this entire process with confidence to say that, yes, there are multiple layers with which this data is going to traverse, but the way we're looking at it is very similar to what you would want to know in terms of transparency. So, and doing business with that in mind is what inspires confidence for your customers, saying that, yes, there is security, these people are ethical in the way they're handling my information, and overall there is a clear indication of where my data is going to sit, how is my data going to be used, to what level is my data going to be used with my information on it. So and to what level is the data going to be anonymized or pseudonymized, so that characteristics that talk about me as an individual are no longer there. Okay, so that's just from a point of sale perspective, where you're looking at it from a digital trust perspective. But what if the data is being sold to a third party or is transferred to a trading partner with little or no notifications to the people or the entities where this data is generated from? Becomes a bigger question, isn't it? And that is where the challenge is, because enhancing transparency, doing business with confidence when knowing that the data ownership rests with you, there is some sort of ethical consideration that's being given to data, it then drives up the entire trust process that a customer would have on an organization's information architecture. Yeah. So there are a number of factors that then come in when you're looking at how is it that you're going to approach. Sorry, you're on the right slide. To the next slide, please, Lawrence. Right. So let's talk about how you're going to approach this. You've got the normal way of doing things versus, what is it that you need to do now, given that you have some specific focus areas. So we've looked at it in 4 different ways. You're looking at financial, your customer, internal, and growth. So from a financial perspective, what are we looking at? Definitely, we need to decrease the costs that are going to that we're going to incur, because of course the cost of compliance is going to be one key area, but the real thing is, what exactly are we trying to be in terms of our financial capabilities? We want to increase shareholder wealth. We want to make sure that we're doing business well. We're increasing our profits. And how do we do that? By decreasing the costs, the potential costs that are involved in litigation, in fines, in anything that can potentially lead to non-compliance. So which is basically penalties, fines, etc. And then 3, the return on investment. When you're looking at an increased return on investment on what kind of investments you're putting into place from a digital perspective, that optimizes your risk that you're looking at from a privacy perspective. And understanding what kind of protocols do you want to put in place when you're moving to the cloud is also very essential. Now, a lot of people look at investing in technology as one of the components to stay relevant in today's industry. But the truth is, if you're not going that route, there's definitely going to be disruption that is going to come to your business. You're going to lose out on market share. Reduced market share would mean lesser profits, and that is working exactly opposite to what you tend to do when you're running a business. Second most important pillar, or rather from an external perspective, the first or the most important component in a business is your customer. So if you do not have a strengthened customer relationship, you're not able to show the customer the value that you're driving as a business. You're not going to show how you're enhancing that person's confidence by increasing your brand value. And when you increase the trust in the customer, the customer is able to increase the reputation of your particular firm in the market. And that leads to a bigger loyal customer base, and that increases the way you're looking at your SKUs, you're looking at the services that you're going to deliver, and at the same time, you're able to support, the customers are able to see the value that they're able to drive out of the business when they have trust in the organization digitally. And The internal components are now you're looking at optimizing business processes, improving the overall skill set that is there, retaining employees, increasing the security and privacy compliance practices, reducing your reaction time to events because now you're being more proactive based on the investments that you've made. And that overall drives your growth in terms of how it's going to increase your overall market sales revenue, your overall market size, your entity's value, and the customer base. See, a lot of startups, let me give you this example of startups. A lot of startups, especially when in their early stages, love social media activity. And they feel that social media activity is directly going to help them grow. But the truth is, you're creating market awareness. And when you're creating market awareness, you're interacting with the end user or the end customer directly. And when you're directly dealing with the end customer, there is no other middleman. So which means that you're enhancing a component of your organization to directly deal with the customer's softer side of the element, which is the customer trust. Now, the moment anything happens to your organization from a social media standpoint, and you're not able to disclose that correctly, you have eroded customer trust, and that does not look good, especially when you're just starting out your business. Okay, even if you're an organization that has been in the market for a very long time, and you move to a social media presence, that also has a direct impact. To the next slide, please. So why is privacy important? We've talked about all the business risks. We've talked about all the components that involve cybersecurity. We've talked about people. We've talked about business processes. We've talked about optimization. But where is all this coming in terms of privacy? Privacy is important because, number one, when you're looking at privacy, you're not just looking at one angle. You're looking at your organization as a whole. And why are we looking at organization as a whole? Because data is being used within your organization to drive business, to generate sales, and to actually look at your customer value retention. So which means that data about an individual is being used in one form or the other in various areas within your organization. And when we're talking about all these different areas, we're talking about business processes that come into play. If your business processes are not tweaked to actually match the compliance requirements, then we have a challenge. Why do we have a challenge? First and foremost, there has to be a record of processing activities that you have. That is where you understand what kind of data you have, what kind of data inventory you've created, where are you using people's data, how are you using people's data, to what extent do you need it. And if you're collecting excess information, you're directly non-compliant. So which means that redesigning your business processes, redesigning or adjusting your ERP or reconfiguring your ERP, probably upgrading your ERP to now match certain standards, then becomes an overall financial issue. Because, of course, you want to make sure that you're eliminating inefficiencies, you're trying to be more compliant to your regulator, and you're also making sure that you're able to retain your customer trust. So in this entire process, you first have to start operational, and there's also the financial elements that need to come into place. And of course, regulation and compliance play a very important role when it comes to your overall reputation of your organization. The next slide, please. So I'm not going to run you through this because this is very basic. A lot of people understand this already. Personal data is what directly identifies you: your name, ID number, email address, etc. There are some indirectly identifiable information like date of birth, license plate numbers, etc., phone numbers. Sensitive data is basically related to anything that is termed or considered sensitive. It can be a biometric data, property details, marital status details, family details, your physical and mental health status, your beliefs, etc. The next slide. Now, principles of data protection. This is where everything gets interesting. A lot of people want to ask, or a lot of people are not clear as to, can I process this information? Let's say if you're going onto social media, can I process this information? Can I not process this information? Is this allowed? Is it not allowed? What exactly am I supposed to do? So for that, there's a lawful basis of processing information. But first, in order for us to get to the lawful basis of information, it's relevant for us to understand what kind of principles do we need to operate within the organizations. Well, first and foremost, there has to be an appropriate legal basis or a legitimate interest in how you're doing or you're processing this particular data or you're collecting this information. So when you're talking about lawfulness, you're talking about basically a contract. If you, in order for you to perform a contract, you need some sort of information, and that becomes a lawful basis of how you're going to collect this information. Second is on transparency. You need to have a clear way of communicating with your stakeholders to show them that this is exactly why we need your information, and this is the reason why we are processing this information in order for you to get some sort of clarity as to where this information is being used. Three is purpose limitation, which means that data cannot be used for anything and everything. There is a specific reason why this data has been collected, and it has to be used for that particular purpose only. Making sure that the data that you're collecting is, or the data, you as a data handler, as an organization, you're making sure that the integrity, confidentiality elements, and the availability of data is always maintained. So what does that mean? It means that, number one, you're not tampering with the data at any given time. You're not allowing anyone who is not authorized to view your data or to interact with your data to not do so. And three, availability, to make sure that the data is available to only those who need to see this data and not to anyone else. So when we're doing this, we're basically reducing your threat surface area to reduce it to a point where you have certain cyber threats that are imminent that you can definitely reduce, and that's what the aim is. And that is what one of the principles of data protection is. 5 is on data minimization, so which means that if you have multiple areas where you're collecting this information and it's the same information that's being collected, you need to reduce that. You need to make sure that whatever you're collecting is just adequate enough for you to use that information for purposes of carrying out your business as usual. Accuracy. Now, this is very interesting because a lot of people tend to query as to where did you get my information from? Is this information correct, or is this information is not correct, etc. So accuracy becomes a very big component because you should only process accurate data that is up to date, and that information must originate from a single source or from a very reliable source. Storage limitation, you cannot keep the data for as long as you like. You will probably want to remove certain information that is no longer relevant to your organization because, of course, the purpose with which you've kept that data may or may not have expired. So, just to make sure that you're keeping the house clean, you need to make sure that you're reducing the data that you have from yesteryears. Fairness, you have to have the element of respect when you're treating this information because this is relating to an individual. And lastly, transfer of information outside the country or outside your jurisdiction. Unless and until there are adequate safeguards, unless and until you're sure that there is a proof of these safeguards in place, it is best advised not to transfer information outside the country because you do not know what kind of information or what this information is being used for. And that becomes a very big challenge because should there be any breach outside the country, should there be anyone who's using your data outside the country and you're not aware of it, it becomes a big challenge because you do not know how the data ended up with that particular third party or someone is monetizing the value of that particular data. The next slide, please. Now, when it comes to collection and notification, it's mandatory for you to understand first, how is it that you're collecting? Are you directly collecting the data from the data subject, or are you collecting data from any other sources, like, for instance, publicly available information, third parties who are giving this data to you, any sort of information that is coming from any other source, like, for instance, next of kin information on your CV or preferences. These are all indirect data collection touchpoints. So what do you do? What do organizations normally do when, for example, let's say if there's a CV that has come, the resume that has come for a job application, and you have references, you have phone numbers, you have the person's email, you have the person's office, you have all this information that is there, that is given to you. The normal course of business, you will probably not even look at it again. You will probably just keep it aside. But remember, that information is still available to you. And the person who's whose information or it is, or the person who owns that information does not know that you have information relating to this person. So the right way to do it is notify the person. Say that, listen, we've received your information through so and so, and because of this, we want, and this is the reason why we've received this information, and this is exactly what we want to do with your information, and you keep it till that particular place. You do not do anything else. Like, for instance, if the candidate is not selected, then you definitely have to delete that information. You don't necessarily need to keep it for a longer time. Yeah. To the next slide. Now, principles of, I think this has already been covered. To the next one, please. Yeah. So what are the rights of the data subject? The rights of the data subjects are basically, number one, they have the right to be informed. They have the right to access their information. I'm sure those of us who used Facebook for a very long time, you have the feature where you can export your information from Facebook, right? They have the right to object the data from being processed. And if, let's say, the data is inaccurate, they have the right to make those corrections, and they have the right to request you to delete their information. So what happens if the data subject is probably a minor, if he's disabled, if he's old, or if he needs a representative to handle the data, or to handle consent, or to handle his rights on behalf of that person? So here what we're looking at is a guardian or someone else who's duly authorized to act as an administrator on behalf of this particular individual. And that person has the right to exercise the rights of that individual. So in any given time frame, you cannot say that no, we can collect this information or we can use this information unless and until there is a clear basis for which you're using this information. And if there is a basis, then when you are seeking consent, it is always advisable that whoever is responsible for this particular process, that person is able to give or able to exercise the rights of the data subject. Now, when you're talking about, we've talked about the lawful basis. To the next, please. No, just a slide back. Right. So we've talked about lawful basis. I've mentioned a number of times about what lawful bases are. So a lawful basis is basically where there are specific areas or the specific norms under which you can process personal data. So one is consent. Second is a contractual necessity. Third is legal obligation. Four is vital interest. Five is public interest. Legitimate interest, meaning you are processing this information for a specific reason. And lastly, research. Now, why is this relevant when we're looking at your organization? Because there are areas that are gray for a lot of people within operations, a lot of people who want to know why this information should not be used. Or there are questions as to, can I use this information for marketing purposes? Can I use this information for probably communicating with this person? Or my invoice has the name, the phone number, etc. Is that okay? So to basically make sure that your processes are streamlined, you need to understand that, yes, there are 7 ways that are allowed, that are lawfully approved when you're using data. And that is your personal data. And in order for you to actually use that information, consent is not necessarily the only way. We've seen, in the past couple of days, we've seen a lot of people who seek explicit consent for whatever they're doing. Like, for instance, when you're on the website, you have cookies, you say accept all cookies, etc., etc. So what are they doing? What is that mechanism? They're obtaining consent. Remember, at the same time when they are obtaining consent, there's some information about you as an individual that they are collecting, and you're not aware of it. Now, as much as, yes, this is an organization collecting this information, there is a specific need for it. And that need is what that they should address when they're giving you the option of collecting this information. Now, on the flip side, you are the organization, you're not the consumer of the services. Should you definitely keep consent as one of your key priorities? Yes. Why is that important? It is important because If, let's say, you're not dealing with anything that can potentially cause harm to an individual, or does not have, or not protecting his vital interests, or has any sort of issues in terms of his safety, then consent is definitely acceptable. Otherwise, there are other reasons why you should collect information. There's definitely a question as to, why is it that when I go to certain places, people like to keep a tab of my name, my phone number, where I'm coming from, my ID details, etc., etc. That does not necessarily violate your rights as a data subject, but on contrast, there is the public interest that should anything happen, like let's say during a pandemic, we've seen that collecting this kind of information definitely helps track down people who may have been exposed to this particular virus. So there is a legitimate interest, there is the public interest as well, and it definitely has vital interest. And at that point, you don't necessarily need consent as one of the only lawful bases of processing. Now, when it comes to research, a lot of people like to understand, a lot of organizations like to understand how is it that we've been faring in the past. And you don't necessarily need customer details there. You don't necessarily need the name of a customer. You don't necessarily need the phone number of the customer there. So what do? You remove anything that is personally identifiable to the customer. You separate that from the data that is actually going to drive insights into your organization. And that is what research you should ideally do. Especially when you're looking at anything like, for instance, you're looking at medical research. If you're looking at interactions to drugs, you don't necessarily need to have the person's name. All you need to know is specific information about the person, like, for instance, weight, height, age, maybe racial origin, and that's about it. And all this information can basically be deciphered as keeping a data subject as a statistic. You don't necessarily need to identify that individual. To the next slide, please. A quick comparison of how things are in terms of Kenya and Uganda. We've talked about the lawful basis, and we can see that there are certain areas where the vital interests, especially around how it is being put in context. For Uganda, it's subsumed under the public duty or the law enforcement and the medical necessity rather than a standalone ground. And in Kenya, we're looking at journalism or literacy and scientific research as a distinct lawful ground of processing information. So both the Kenya Data Protection Act and the Uganda Data Protection Act came out in 2019, and there are processing activities, or there are processing principles, grounds for processing principles that are pretty much common between the both countries. So that is the basis for which we've done a quick comparison to see, which ones fall where. I'm sure this slide will be shared with the audience at a later point for your perusal. I wouldn't want to dwell a lot onto it. The next slide, please. Now on specific areas, what are the things that you should be aware of when you're dealing with sensitive information, health information, and children information? Now, a lot of organizations tend to collect information such as marital status, such as biometric information, fingerprints, etc., for purposes of actually, even providing access. Right? You have information about the individual's face, for instance, if you have facial recognition that's enabled in your organization for clock-in, clock-outs. Now, that is a legitimate activity. If it is being processed, if it is processing and it relates directly to anything that is necessary for the establishment or for the defense of a legal claim or for carrying out an obligation of a data controller with vital interest, it's still fine. It's acceptable. Health data, again, you have to make sure that it is the responsibility of you as an organization in liaison with your healthcare provider to make sure that the rights are exercised clearly. When it comes to children data, the guardians or the parents must be able to understand and give consent in the best interest of the child. So you must definitely determine what is the basis for which you're actually allowing this particular information to be processed. You should document it as an organization. You should say that this is exactly what we're using your information for, and nothing more, nothing less. You should basically have the design of the document in a way that you get it right the very first time. You should not have a lot of back and forth. You should make sure that, of course, you're an organization. You have to have the professionalism in it. And if in case your purpose change, you need to make sure that you're reassessing the entire lawful basis to make sure that things are actually being done in the exact way that you've set out to do. The next slide, please. Now, we've talked about privacy and how privacy is going to come into the overall picture. We've talked about risks relating to privacy. Now, what is the one thing, or what are the kind of options that you have? How is it that you're going to embark on this journey? How is it that you're going to reduce a lot of disturbances that you may see or you may foresee if you do not go towards compliance? So one of the first things is you're looking at data protection by design or by default. So let's understand what data protection by design means. Now, this is an organization who has probably, for an example, you have probably a system that is being developed or an application that's being developed, or you're even rolling out a co-banking system or any information system for that matter. Okay, you first need to understand what is it that the organization is using that information system for, number one. Number two, what kind of measures are there in that particular information system? What are the features? What are the technologies that are directly relating to this particular project where privacy is definitely needed? Of course, I'll not dive into the technical details, but we are talking about a lot of specific things when it comes to operations, when we're looking at how data is being processed. So we're looking at kind of mechanisms that are there where you as an organization are putting in specific features. You're designing how the process is supposed to be so that you're reducing your overall exposure at a very early stage, right at the point of when you're developing the application, when you're going live with the application, or when you're implementing the application, so that you have sufficient safeguards that are embedded within your operational activities. If people know what exactly the data is that is going to be processed, and what kind of information needs to be collected, to what level is this information relevant, what kind of information is irrelevant, and in the background, what are the security measures that are there? Are you encrypting your personal data when the data is being transferred from point A to point B? Is there anyone who can probably, decipher that information that's moving from point A to point B? And you're, of course, making sure that there's relevant, the data subject knows what exactly is happening, and they have control over the information that you're processing. And lastly, when you do not need the information to be displayed, you're actually removing the personally identifiable information, and through pseudonymization, you're actually replacing it with an artificial identifier. Like, for instance, you have the UHID for a hospital, you have a ID number when you're looking at a government agency. You have something that is removing your name, your phone number, etc. And lastly, you're restricting the physical and logical access to people within your organization and also your vendors. So that is the entire element of designing a data privacy landscape, or you're looking at data protection by design. The next. Lawrence, to the next, please. Thank you. So we've spoken about by design. Now let's talk about by default. So this is where you have settings, you have some sort of privacy measures that are already embedded, that have already been automatically considered when you're developing the information system. So what you're doing is you're actually allowing the data subject to share or you're giving the option to the data subject to share what they want through opting in, opting out, and what kind of information it is that you're automatically protecting vis-a-vis what is it that they're allowing you to protect. And that gives them the feeling that they have the full control over what exactly is being handled when it comes to their personal data. And that becomes, it actually becomes a very easy way to deal with personal data for your organization when it moves to by default. Because here you don't necessarily need to do a lot of changes to your operational processes, but the moment it has been implemented automatically from the word go, everything has data privacy at the heart of it. So you're protecting the information assets, you're protecting end users, you're protecting customers, you're protecting data subjects, you're protecting everything from start to end. And that is usually something that makes a data subject be more inclined towards dealing with your organization, and that makes them trust your organization a bit more. To the next, please. Now, commercial use of data. This is a very interesting topic because a lot of people definitely want to make sure that they are monetizing that information. Now, a lot of people, especially in the social media world, love to get a lot of views, get a lot of use of this information. Why exactly are they using it? Because this is something that they want to, get a wider outreach, make sure that they're able to monetize the people information. Yeah. So there's direct marketing, there's indirect marketing. They're able to now reach to a larger population, and they're able to, use the data that has been generated by these individuals for their own commercial purposes. Now, when should you consider data being used as a commercial indicator? One is when you're sending out marketing material, right? When you're directly interacting with the customer, when you're sending out, or when you're displaying advertisements, when you're sending out messages, when you're sending out WhatsApp prompts to say, this is what we're doing, etc., etc. That is direct marketing. You are using the person's information either directly through his phone number, email address, or even his social media accounts to directly interact with that end user. Now, for that, you are directly using his data to generate some sort of a commercial transaction for yourself. Now, when can you use this information commercially? When you have collected the information from the data subject directly. That means that the consent mechanism has been enabled. There's a contract that's coming into place. There's a lawful basis for which you're using this information. And that is mutually accepted between you and the customer or the end user. And and you are directly notifying the data subject that this is exactly why we're using this information for, and this is what we want to do with it. So for instance, we want to retain your information so that we can contact you at a later point. Things like that. And then lastly, there has to be a mechanism where the data subject can withdraw consent, which means he can say that, listen, I don't want this information anymore to be used by you, so I would like to opt out of whatever you're sending me, right? So when you're giving the permission, or when you're giving the rights to the individual, he's more happy to understand that he has the authority to make the right decision. Now, when you're transferring information outside a particular jurisdiction, especially now when you're using a cloud-based service provider, for instance. Question is, should you inform your data subject about it? Yes, you should, because that is their right. They need to know that the transfer is happening, that is, and their data is going to be outside the country. So when we're talking about a data subject, it doesn't necessarily look at a customer. It looks at your internal stakeholders, your users, your staff. It looks at everyone who is a living human being. Right. So in order for you to carry out business as usual, there has to be some sort of a protocol that you will then need to enable to make sure that you're getting the consent from the individual as you transfer data outside the country. Now, transfer is necessary definitely when you're looking at, what exactly are you providing in terms of a service to wider outreach. And in conclusion, you have to make sure that you are performing this with the interest of the data subject in mind, and you're also making sure that you're covering yourself as an organization clearly, and you have to make sure that you have understood what kind of security measures are there that you have investigated, that you have done due diligence upon, so that you can say that yes, as a data subject, do not worry. Your information is safe with us, and we are using certain third parties, and those third parties are using your information specifically for ABCDE purposes. And at any given point, should you say that you do not want to use this information, you have the right to do so, but there is a detrimental effect where if we're not able to use ABCDE items in the way we want to use them, we may not be able to provide you with the services that you require. Okay, but we cannot outright say that no, we will not give you this, because you've not given us this information, we will not provide you with the service. That is again incorrect. So it's basically understanding the fine line between how you're interacting with your customer, and how you're getting your customers' feedback and consent when you're transferring information outside the country. To the next slide, please. So some of the things that you need to look out for, especially when you're transferring information out, is the receiving country or territory has some sort of a cybersecurity or a data protection framework in place or regulation in place. So a lot of the African nations are coming towards the Maloba Convention, so which means that a lot of people are coming towards having a certain data protection law in place. So the countries where there is the African Union Convention coming in, those countries are definitely able to receive your information because they have some sort of a bilateral agreement on how data is supposed to be handled. Second is the receiving country territory has some sort of an agreement with the source country directly or is part of the overall convention. And lastly, there is a corporate present in that country where there are certain corporate rules that are basically going to be the liabilities of the corporate versus the rights of the corporates versus what exactly have they offered the organization to do and what is it that is benefiting the end user or the customer. So understanding the entire chain of thought before transferring data outside the country is very critical because this can definitely lead to loss of customer retention, loss of customer, and when you lose a customer, definitely, or when you lose a staff, there is a detrimental effect to the business. The next. Now, we've spoken about what are the kind of issues that you may see from a human perspective, from a mentality perspective, from what a person would feel. But now let's look at the regulatory perspective and the security perspective. Yes, we've spoken about incidents, we've spoken about what exactly can constitute a cyber attack. It could be data loss, it could be information that has been stolen, etc. But there has to be adequate ways in which an organization is able to detect such kind of breaches. And when a breach happens, there has to be some sort of an action, some sort of root cause analysis that needs to go in and to find out what exactly happened, how did it happen, when did it actually happen, and who is basically going to be impacted. And more often than not, a breach usually happens through a person's account or through an individual. So when that happens, it could be basically less cyber awareness. It could be basically any sort of attack that can directly manipulate the human element of an individual. So when that happens, the organization definitely has to have some sort of a mechanism, some sort of a process in place to identify that particular incident, identify what has happened in that particular incident, who is it that has been affected the most, and how is it that it has to be communicated to the authorities. Because definitely there has to be some sort of a legal impact that will then come in, a legal action that needs to be taken. And all this has to go through a particular process. There has to be particular timelines, there has to be some sort of business recovery protocols that are there in place. And organizations who do not have this kind of protocols usually tend to suffer more than those who do. So understanding, again, going back to the digital trust component of your organization ties up to this particular incident response and handling. And that plays a very huge part when you're looking at the business resilience of an organization. So, understanding the nature of the breach, understanding the measures that have been put in place, understanding the measures that are going to be taken in order for you to mitigate that particular breach, what kind of actions are you going to take if there's any sort of a threat to an individual. All these should be documented. It's not just knowing, or it's not just a momentary thing. There has to be some sort of a tabletop exercise that needs to be done, some sort of scenarios that need to be played out by the risk and compliance team so that they understand a bit more into detail as to what exactly they should do in an event of a breach. To the next slide, please. Now, let's take things to the top. Strategy, governance, and accountability. When you're talking about strategy, a lot of organizations understand how they want to grow, or they want to create a roadmap on how they want to grow. But understanding privacy is one thing that is not management's responsibility, but it should start at the strategy level. It should start at the board level, because they need to understand, those charged with governance need to understand that there has to be a specific way in a way that the organization is able to safeguard and support business activities to make sure that you're meeting certain expectations of an individual. I'm sure no one wants to work in an organization that is affected by cyber threats, and no one wants to deal with an organization that is constantly under, cyber attacks. So, for management to make sure that they're taking the right kind of actions, the right kind of steps in the right direction, it has to come from the top. It has the governance perspective has to be very, very clear. There has to be a specific designation. You don't necessarily need to have someone who is completely or on a full-time basis, but definitely there has to be someone who is designated to make the right kind of choices, data privacy related, within an organization, and that includes sensitization, coming up with the materials, coming up with specific compliance related programs to make sure that everyone within the organization and those related stakeholders are also able to comply with the overall state of privacy of the organization. And this individual doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's from the risk or audit team, but she should be someone who has relevant academic professional qualifications, should know about cyber threats, should know the legal angle, should be in a position to understand the technicality of particular elements and also the legal aspect of things, so that he can be able to deliver the overall composition of what privacy needs to look like in an organization. And that is, it's not one size fits all for all organization. It is very, it should be tailored to the organization's privacy needs and governance choices. So when it comes to governance, there has to be some sort of roles and responsibilities that need to be documented, that need to be aligned and assigned. And without that, again, the data privacy program or data privacy governance or data governance will definitely fail. So there has to be some sort of a systematic approach to how the overall governance is linked to the strategy and is actually linked to the people who are going to be hired. And lastly, training and awareness, where there has to be a program that runs right from the top all the way through to the end user on how data protection is going to be, or data privacy is going to be there through and through. Next slide, please. So what are the roles and responsibilities of the CEO, board, and data protection committee? First and foremost, to oversee and to make sure that there's some sort of compliance enforcement, there's some sort of legal compliance enforcement in it. There has to be implementation of the best practices that are there at the senior management and the board level, so that you're leading by example. There has to be a valid selection and appointment of a data protection officer, even if it's on a full-time basis or a part-time basis. There has to be some representative that needs to be able to man that particular office. You have to ensure that there's adequate resource allocation, because you're not just looking at the human component, you're not looking at the technology component, you're looking at everything to do with your business as well. So if your one single point of failure has to do with data privacy, then I'm sure there has to be some sort of budgetary allocations to make sure that there is that element of risk that is reduced. You have to make sure that at a strategy level, you have to make sure that you're monitoring how the strategy is moving in terms of privacy. And there has to be some sort of deliberations that go in proactively to show that the board is directly involved in making decisions on how privacy matters are being handled. There has to be relevant partnerships that come in. When you're talking to regulators, there has to be some sort of transparency to the regulator. There has to be some sort of a two-way traffic that needs to come in between the clients, the customers, end users, business, and regulators, so that there's a clarity on what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. And lastly, you have to make sure that there are audits that are being done to check the state of privacy within your organization, and that has to be monitored on a periodic basis. To the next. Now, sorry, you skipped a slide. Okay. Now, the role of a data protection officer, we've spoken about that particular office being a standalone kind of a segment. Now, the role is basically simple. The data protection officer has specific mandates in his office, which means that number one, he has to, or he or she has to understand, how a data processor or controller is processing or collecting information under the Act and what is permissible, what is not permissible by the legislation. To maintain an up-to-date record of what exactly is the way you're going to protect your information assets. So it's not just saying that yes, we want data privacy by design or default, and this is what we want to do. These are the mechanisms, but there has to be some sort of an update as to if there are changes in the environment, if there are changes in the threat landscape, the changes in the risk profiles. All this information has to be very proactively taken in, considered, and changed so that there's some sort of a living document that comes into place to look at the entire governance of data privacy. 3 is monitoring the activities of this particular of the user groups, of the data controllers or the data handlers, so that you're able to understand if there are any sort of unethical practices that are coming out that may directly impact your organization. 4, the data protection officer needs to ensure that there is awareness. There's a good amount of awareness within the organization, and trainings are being handled, trainings are being delivered time to time, and there is a good culture of privacy that is being developed within the organization. And carry out impact assessments. So data protection impact assessments are one of the key instruments to actually understand what can potentially go wrong in terms of data privacy when you're looking at your organization. And lastly, act as a liaison point between the office and between the regulator and the organization. To the next slide. So in a nutshell, what are you supposed to do from a governance perspective? 1, you need to define matrices. Make sure that you're able to measure in something that is that can be tangible from a board perspective, and that has to be done on a periodic basis. 2, make sure that you're communicating the roles that are there within the organization, so responsibilities of employees and how relevant stakeholders are supposed to behave when it comes to data privacy. 3, make sure that you're including data privacy as a risk category from a risk and compliance perspective. Make sure that you're looking at privacy not just as one of the items that you do not want to discuss that are not important, but they should be as important as your financial information. And lastly, make sure that the data protection officer is independent of any data handler roles that may directly conflict his role. And do not, just put a one-size-fits-all document or a privacy program, and do not leave the privacy program unattended. So what I mean by that is just do not just keep a policy and say, yes, we have a policy and that's it. That's the end of the story. No, that's not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to make sure that you're reassessing risks, you're understanding what kind of privacy issues you may come across, and you also have to be cognizant of the fact that the technology landscape keeps changing, threats keep changing, and you have to have a tab of all these things that are happening, and that should reflect in your privacy program. So if you keep it static, then just be assured that you're doing the wrong thing. The data protection officer should not have conflicting duties. And lastly, a generalized training does not, make any sort of difference in an organization. This is what we have noticed. Specialized trainings, focus on specific groups, on key staff members, on how they're handling data, on specific process owners. That is where the sensitization is more effective, because they're able to understand, they're able to relate their specific jobs to the particular information that is being passed to them as to what the mandate is. And that is very important. The next slide, please. Yes, now coming to how you're going to manage your notices, privacy management, policy management. This is something that is, it's more, it's more looking at your organization from a futuristic perspective. You're not just looking at your standard operating procedures or looking at what your auditors told you to do or what your legal and compliance officers told you to do. This is more customized towards what you want to protect in terms of your information assets, and data being one of them, in fact being the crown jewel. You need to make sure that you're developing a very specific documentation, policies, procedures on how you're addressing information relating to an individual, and what kind of information is accessible internally, what kind of information needs to be accessible externally, and how is it that vendors, third parties are actually able to perform their duties without being without facing any sort of bottlenecks. And lastly, there has to be some sort of a mechanism where there's a transparent and concise communication that's going out to the data subject, right? So of course you have to make sure that their rights, a data subject is informed of how their rights are being, what are their rights, how their rights are being protected, when they can invoke them, how the data is being collected, how it is being processed, and which countries is the data being shipped to, which third parties are using this kind of information, what are the security measures that an organization has, what are the security measures that an organization should have, etc., etc. So, and more important is, what are the kind of consequences that that a data subject should know about in an event something will definitely, or in an event something goes to happen. The next slide, please. So what are the critical policies? One is a data privacy protection policy. Second is a privacy statement. And lastly is a retention policy. You need to make sure that these are three policies or three critical documents that are not just to be formulated and kept aside, but these are living documents, and these need to be updated from time to time as and when the risk profile of an organization changes, as and when the user groups change, as and when business scenarios change, and as and when technology changes. The next, please. Now, privacy enhancing technologies. The question is, yes, we've talked about the theoretical side, we've talked about the soft side, we've talked about all these things. Now, what kind of technologies do you need to implement? What are the privacy enhancing technologies that are there? Yeah. So the whole element is that you have to have some sort of technology background to at least understand how this entire integration is going to happen. So there are about 6 odd PETs, that's what we call them, PETs, that are available, that are there in the market. You're talking about, or from a trusted environment all the way through to synthetic data, basically, data that specific data sets that are introduced with statistical properties to, without revealing a lot of information, and you're actually protecting the actual original data set of the individual. So there are a lot of complex technology terms that are going to come in. I'm not going to delve into that detail, but just know that over the next decade, if we were to look at privacy enhancing technologies, what is it that you're going to expect? One is, we've seen the customer behavior where customers expect enterprises to handle data more responsibly. So, just like when I started this particular conversation, I mentioned there's some statistics that we want to go through. So through that particular poll, what we've noted is that about 68% of the customers are concerned about their online privacy. So this is a direct concern that shows that customers, more than half, in fact 70% of them, are actually worried or concerned as to how they can trust companies with their data. And when the trust is lost, there's a direct revenue loss to the organization. Second is there's definitely evolving compliance mandates, and the way things are, you're looking at complex regulatory compliance landscapes that are coming in. You're not just looking at, okay, is this compliant to the law? You're also looking at people, you're looking at processes, you're looking at technology. So that is increasing the complexity on how you're looking at data protection. So which means that there has to be some sort of increase in how the engineering element is going in when you're looking at data protection. 3, you're looking at business innovations. Right now, there was a full conversation that I was a part of, a very interesting conversation where people were talking about disruptive technologies. But the flip side of a disruption is an innovation that has created a new business opportunity. And when a new business opportunity is created, there's supply chain elements that come in. There's increased demand for collaboration. Especially in the banking sector, we've seen there's open banking that's come up. People are looking at sharing data with multiple parties. They're seeing how they can do cross-border collaborations. You can see how, a lot of ecosystems are now popping up. So When you're looking at all these things, when you're looking at digital transformation, you're looking at a lot of components that are moving. There's definitely the need of keeping data private and supporting and exploring how new cases can be used now. New base cases can be used in terms of how data can be used that were previously thought as high risk, that are now or that can be reduced to a more palatable risk rating. Then there has to be a definite shift towards ethical data use. So, there's data monetization that has been a practice in the past, and now moving towards a more, morally obligated way of collecting, safeguarding, and responsible usage of this information is becoming more critical, and that is what the future trend looks like. And there's a lot of discussion about how how organizations will change in terms of their roles. It's not just going to be a data privacy officer in the future. You're looking at probably, a couple of other people are coming in, like, chief data officers. You're looking at chief information officers roles changing or becoming more into a chief data privacy officer, etc. So, looking at how the ethical use is going to come into place is very clear. And lastly, on the emerging technology and how the cryptocurrency markets have been moving, there's definitely that need of understanding what kind of verifications are going to be coming in terms of transactions, and how sensitive financial information can definitely be used in a way that, when you're talking about sensitive financial information, you are talking about sensitive data. So how this is going to be protected, how this is going to be, again, what kind of mechanisms are going to be there, what kind of privacy enhancements are going to be there from a technology perspective to make sure that, customers are still being treated the way they should be treated in terms of matters privacy. So with that, in the interest of time, of course, I'd like to move to the next slide, where there's a slide summary of what the Kenya Data Protection Act looks like vis-a-vis what the Uganda Data Protection Act looks like. And I think there's a lot of similarity between both of them. There's a requirement from the regulators on the registration, on the rights of the data subjects. I think there's a lot of similarity from data handlers' perspective. There's a lot of similarity on basically what controllers and processes should apply in terms of security, privacy by design, by default data minimization practices, and what kind of transfer, cross-border data transfers are permitted from a Kenyan perspective as well as from a Ugandan perspective. To the next slide, please. You can see most of them are very similar. And what is more important is, globally, this is what is coming out as what is applicable in terms of these specific criteria, like, for instance, registration process, compliance to the data subject rights, obligations of the data handlers, how you're minimizing data, and how you're creating some sort of an ecosystem for cross-border data transfer. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to the host. Lawrence, over to you. Thank you.
Well. Thank you so very much, Satya, for that, as very comprehensive as it can get. Wow. I am so sure that there are quite a number of questions that people might be having. I know we are running short of time, but it will be not nice if we just close this webinar. I am sure you might be having a question. So if you do have a question, it's time for you to ask that question, either on the chat or in the Q&A, or you can just unmute and ask. You can raise your hand and ask. Anybody with a burning question? There are 200 of us on the webinar who have stayed all this time for 1 hour plus. You have a question to ask? Satya, let me go first. There's when you started, you talked about the generative AI and how we are interacting with generative AI. And I know we do this not just at individual levels, but even at organizational levels. We use organizational machines to interact with generative AI, and we pose questions and all that. Did I hear you saying that generative AI, when we do that, it's gathering data one way or another, and it can be dangerous to us as organizations and even as individuals? You're muted. You are muted.
Sorry about that. Sorry about
Yeah.
that. I'm saying yes, absolutely. Because first and foremost, when you're looking at a generative AI, what you're looking at is, first of all, your machine. Your machine is able to communicate with a specific AI, a specific tool that is out there that is collecting information about who you are in terms of your IP address, in terms of your machine, your browser, etc., etc., etc. There's quite a bit of information that's actually revealed when you go out there. And, the generative AI, the nature of it is when you're talking to the generative AI in a way that you're asking questions, it's actually trying to map what exactly are you trying to do? What is your question? What is the background process? And then against that, it's actually searching what is available on the internet, what is available on private sources within your organization, etc., etc. So through that, it's actually finding out where this information or this query that you've asked for is relevant and is actually with keywords is able to identify which response can generate. So when you're doing that, it's actually creating a map of what your thoughts are. So because of that, there is that element of one, it knows your location, two, it knows your IP address, three, it knows what kind of discussion or what kind of points you've asked, and four, if it is able to relate or if it's able to tie up with any other information that you probably don't have to provide, it can make sense of what exactly you're trying to do. So it's all part of the way it is offering you personalized services. Right, so there's the good side of it, and then there's the bad side of it, where if there was someone who wants to basically gain access into your account with maybe ChatGPT, he'll be able to see the history, and he will be able to also understand what is it that you're looking at. So, of course, generative AI, as much as it is fun to interact with, and it has become the go-to for a lot of organizations. That is just the one part of it. The second part is there's a lot of brain drain. And this is where things get interesting, especially when you're talking about generative AI. The reason for this brain drain is people don't want to use their minds. As much as, yes, okay, fine, there's this particular query I need to answer. Instead of actually doing the original research, they would probably just go into the generative AI, type in a question, say this is what I want, and then boom. So organizational brain drain is a real thing. So question then becomes, why am I using an employee? Why am I employing someone to do this work? Why am I not just using AI? Right. So there are those elements as well that then come in as to why the human judgment actually plays a bigger role than the AI. And that is where the issues are in reality. Hope I've answered your question, Lawrence.
Yeah, you've answered it very succinctly, and I do appreciate that. I think it's something that we need to keep in mind. Some people are asking about the slides. We are going to share the slides. I hope it's okay with you, Satya, for us to share the slides with everyone. Okay. Someone is asking, are NDAs part of data privacy tools? This is Barbara.
Well, NDAs, it's a legally binding instrument, not necessarily data privacy related, because you see, you're looking at trade secrets, you're looking at quite a number of areas in the NDA. It's not just the privacy side, but yes, definitely one of the tools, one of the areas you need to consider when you're signing an NDA is privacy around how you're using information, if there is an absolute use of personal information or if there's a disclosure of personal information. And that is something that you definitely need to consider.
All right. There is another question. I mean, what comes first between policies, guidelines, and company registration? This is Tom Rukundo asking that question.
All right. So first of all, for purposes of compliance, let's look at it from a compliance lens. If you're not registered with the Data Protection Office or you're not registered with PDP or ODPC, first is you're non-compliant. So as much as you want to get things into a compliance perspective, the first step is already missed. So from a compliance lens, registration is absolutely needed. And then from that point of view, if you have any sort of practices that are already in place, then formalizing those through policies, creating guidelines on how to use that information are probably the next steps. But if you have an organizational strategy where you're keeping privacy at the crux of everything, at the center of everything, then there is no harm in registering the company after you've gotten to a reasonable level of compliance. But again, remember, this is again a very time sensitive issue. You need to make sure that if you are operating in business, you have to make sure that you are compliant. It's just like, you're generating revenue, or when should you apply to a URA, or should you apply to KRA after you generate revenue, or before you generate revenue? So in simple terms, number one, make sure that your company is compliant by registering yourself. Then second, embark on the process. You don't necessarily need to be 100% compliant when you're registering your company. You need a place to start. So start with the registration of the company, then go towards compliance.
Awesome stuff. Prakasan actually is asking how the data collected locally being handled or processed a centralized IT team outside the country and its implication. I don't know what that. Do you get that question?
Not too clear about it, but from what I understand, if data is being collected locally but is being processed by a team that is outside the country, what would its implications be? I think that's the question that Mr. Prakasan is asking. So if I get that question correctly, then there are two ways you can look at this. One is there has to be, if this is a related party or if this is a vendor or third party, then there has to be some sort of a SOC 2 type 2 kind of a report. Okay, so if it's a related party, if it is maybe your sister company or something else, there has to be some sort of an agreement that has to be in place. And that agreement has to actually break down what is it that they're supposed to do, what are their obligations, because if the person or that entity is acting on your behalf as a data processor, then they have to follow what it is that you are setting as a data controller. So they are processing on your behalf, so they have to follow your rules. That's number one. The implication is if these people are not following, or if this organization is not following that particular way of doing things, then you have an issue of non-compliance. And that is the biggest risk. And you are looking at fines, you are looking at facing fines. So in a nutshell, if you were to look at it from how it is that you're processing this information, number one is make sure that there is a data processor agreement and the third party is aware of his rights, obligations, and how you as an organization or a data controller or the person who's subcontracting this particular detail wants to have the data processed. What are the set of rules? What are the kind of data sets that you're going to process, and what is it that is needed? What is it that is not needed, and to what level of access should that particular person have? What are the controls that the organization should have in terms of privacy, in terms of security, in terms of cybersecurity, physical access control, etc. And there has to be some sort of a clear report, some sort of an audit report that you can use as a proof to show that, yes, this is the organization that is processing this amount of information on our behalf. And these are the safeguards or the measures that have been implemented in place. And this is the state of how they're effective or ineffective. So if you consider that route, then I think you're fairly okay in terms of how you're going to process your information outside the country.
All right. Ruth Nakanjako actually is asking I think it's a very specific question. You've talked about transfer of data to outside countries as a principle of data protection, what steps can be gone through for a company to transfer data outside in case maybe the company employee recruitment is done in another country, for example, from South Africa?
Okay, so in South Africa, there's Poppy. So that's another data protection another data protection act that's already there. So I had mentioned about the Malabo Convention. So African states have the common underlying principles on data protection. So in an event, you are using a third party to recruit on your behalf, then the data subject needs to be aware of what are his rights and obligations, number one. Number two, there has to be a clear indication as to what is the medium through which you're collecting this information. So let's say if it's a third party who's processing this information, if it's an agency, or if it is any other person who's acting on behalf of your organization collecting this information, there has to be a contract, there has to be some sort of obligation, some sort of rules with which that particular organization has to play by. So, for instance, if you're saying that you're collecting or you're recruiting someone in South Africa or you're recruiting someone from Uganda in South Africa, you have to make sure that the consent mechanism is clearly there. There has to be rights of the data subject on what this information is going to be used for. How long is this information going to be stored in terms of, your data life cycle? Where is it going to be stored? Can it be deleted? Are you giving the data subject that rights to delete it? Which is basically following what the rights of the data subject are, irrespective of the country that this particular data subject data is being transferred to. And it's always good practice to notify the data subject that this information is going to be transferred to another country where certain information about you is going to be processed for purposes of this employment or for whatever it is that you're using that information for.
All right, there is another question. Thank you, Satya, for that. Are there recent court cases in Uganda or East Africa regarding abuse of data privacy? This is from Nicholas. Yes, Nicholas. I think there are some cases in Uganda, but let's start with the ones that you know, Satya.
There are quite a number of them. I think there's the most recent one of Google that has been there.
Yeah.
In the past, there have been a number, for instance, I think there's one for Huawei or Oppo. There are a number of them that are there, and I'm sure you can find all of these case laws on the websites of the regulators, and they're quite detailed, where the regulator has gone in to say which particular section of the act have they noted as non-compliance, what are the fines and implications, and what is the outcome. So there's a very detailed and very comprehensive case study case studies, not even one, the case studies that are available, and there are quite a number of those, and they're actually available for public reading.
Yeah, if you really search, I think who is this who asked, Nicholas, if you searched just a brief search online, you're going to find quite a number of cases, even as late as 2025 in Uganda. There are cases of data protection. One last question. What do we do with data collected before this act? This is from Tom. That is data collected without consent.
It's fine. You just need to roll out a new mechanism on how you're going to collect consent. You see, consent is not just given once. You need to make sure that there is some sort of relevancy that comes in, because there has to be a change in the process, because now you're incorporating consent mechanism. There is a definite change in how you're collecting this information. So because of that, there has to be an update as to how you're going to roll this consent mechanism out to be compliant. So when you have collected data without consent before the act was enacted, you can still have that provision to roll out the consent mechanism again, just to update the information that you have, so that there are multiple ways you can do this. You can also just write to the customer saying that we would like to update the information that we have about you. And by giving this information, you consent to us processing your information for ABCDE reasons. And through that way, you're still able to show compliance to the regulator.
Yeah, thank you so much. Finally. Okay, I know there are two more questions here, but someone is asking, and a curious one is, what is the role of secure coding in preserving data privacy?
Okay, now, when you're looking at secure coding practices, you're looking at, things to do with proper error handling. You're looking at authentication. You're looking at authorizations. And for instance, when I mentioned on the PETs, the privacy enhancing technologies, there are ways that you can look at things when you're looking at coding. Like for instance, you're looking at, let's talk about input, the most basic, right? So when you're looking at there's a specific attack that is coming in for input. Like let's say there is cross-site scripting. Let's say there is SQL injection. When you're coding, when you're starting on the coding itself, you're actually understanding the sanitary practices for all the users. So when you're looking at a perspective that is going to reduce your threat landscape, you're reducing this, you're actually putting in input validation mechanisms to now reduce or even prevent attacks like SQL injection. Error handling, when you're looking at error handling, you don't necessarily need to, and let's say you have encryption enabled, you don't necessarily need to decrypt the information in order for you to analyze. You can actually keep it still encrypted. You can use homographic encryption to actually go through the entire process of error handling without actually having to decrypt. Authentication, authorization, again, you have, it's no longer the two-factor authentication. You actually have passcodes, you have passwordless authentication that's coming in. You have a number of ways you can minimize privilege escalations, or necessary whatever privileges you have in terms of performing a particular task. You can also reduce that. You can see how you are looking at SAST-DAST protocols, how you're looking at code review, code analysis on a number of ways in a number of periods. You can also look at what kind of dependencies you have, what kind of third-party libraries that you have that are dependent, that your code is dependent on, how you can reduce those, what are the known vulnerabilities in those third-party libraries, and how is it that you're able to monitor which vulnerability may potentially impact your organization or impact your app, again through SAST-DAST, and maybe also look at things to do with monitoring, security monitoring, logging, all these things again, to see who is unauthorized, where unauthorized access is coming in from, what kind of secure defaults are there, what is, how is it that you're going to rotate the unauthorized access and exposure of sensitive information on a regular basis. So there are a number of ways, definitely, but these are the ones that are that come to my mind.
Okay, thank you. So let's close with this question. I think the concern here by Kikundwa is data protection at all levels, saying that we need data protection as everyone's responsibility, from interns to the CEO. But how do we ensure thorough data protection at all levels, since different individuals in the company treat data differently? I think that's a very good question. We can close with that.
Absolutely. You see, that's what I mentioned. There has to be a designated official for this. There has to be someone who's responsible for data protection within the office. It's not just any, you can't say internal audit is responsible. You can't say, maybe risk and compliance is responsible for state of privacy within the organization. There has to be an individual. There has to be a role that has to be developed specifically for that. And that role, again, is not, it's not one size fits all. It has to be specific to the organization's needs and requirements. Are you more on the legal side? Are you more on the technology side? Do you need someone who's more technologically competent to understand what's happening? What kind of dependencies do you have? So the role is again going to be focused on how is it that the organization is behaving, and through that they're able to see what kind of impact data privacy has, which is what we said about data privacy impact assessments. And what is it that you're looking at in terms of matters to do with rights, responsibilities, and what are the kind of underlying principles that you have? Is it data protection by design? Is it by default? What kind of data minimization practices are there? So again, it starts all the way from the top. You're looking at the trickle down effect going down to the granular area, which is the interns, and how is it that each layer is actually going to what is relevant. So again, we're talking about specific trainings, user groups that, of course, you need to see what kind of information is a particular user group interacting with, and what is it that is relevant to them. So again, training and sensitization has to be customized to those specific groups, tailored to those specific groups, so that you're able to create or foster an environment of privacy within the organization. So, as you've correctly mentioned, it's everyone's responsibility, but again, there has to be one person who's going to drive this entire change, because the largest and the most difficult part is driving change to make sure that the organization is compliant in terms of data privacy.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much, Satya, for this very comprehensive talk. This is a lot of good information, a lot of very potent information that we've gathered today, and I'm sure we are all grateful for the same. As shared already, we are going to make available this presentation to you as soon as we can. And I'm seeing that my colleague Bumi is saying if you have any more information, any more questions that you want to be answered, you can write to info@ug.gt.com. We will get back to you as far as that is concerned. Meanwhile, stay good, stay well. Please make sure that you internalize these things and you start implementing these things, because like we talked about the SWOT analysis, you don't want to go along with threats. In the recent years, it was easy for us to just treat data the way we wanted, but things are getting tighter and tighter. So let us take heed. If you have anything that you needed us to address, again on info@ug.gt.com, we'll address it as far as this subject matter is concerned. It is from us to you. Have a good day. Until next time when we have another one of these webinars. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.